Hello, everyone, and welcome to Orthodoxy. My name is Andy Schmidt, and we are back with another podcast episode. Today, we are talking about something brand new, something that just kind of came out, a story that just broke, and it's just me, nobody else, but we're talking about a brand new story. I do have to say at the beginning of this podcast, I got to give a disclaimer that this episode will have some bad language, not necessarily cussing or anything like that, but some sexual language due to the story that was broke a couple of days ago. And so if you've got kids or if you're listening around children, probably shouldn't do that. Some of the things that are said are really not good. That said, the story is on these NSA sex chats that just came out. And it was a couple of days ago, I think 2 days ago, Christopher Rufo and Hannah Grossman broke a huge story about sex chats attached to the National Security Agency. It was on City Journal, and I'll put the link to that into the description. It's not a very long article, but it kind of blew up when it was dropped because we're finding out more and more politically and governmentally how much corruption and how much just horrifically immoral and sick stuff has been actually happening behind closed doors for years, and nobody has been doing anything about it. Well, now under the Trump administration, it seems like more and more things are coming out, more and more things are coming to light of what's actually been going on for years behind people's backs and what taxpayer dollars have been used for, and what sort of ideologies and initiatives have been pushed with my money, with your money, with our money. And so I thought it'd be interesting to do a podcast on this. Now, again, I've said this in previous podcasts, but for new listeners and just, for a reminder for people, Orthodoxy started as a theological podcast, strictly theological. We talked about some cultural things, but it was always coming from a theological, biblical angle. And actually, that theological core has never changed, and I don't think it's ever going to change. It's not going to change as long as I'm here, because I'm a Christian, and everything that I do, everything that I think about is all coming from a biblical Christian worldview. And so some people might think, well, why are we talking about NSA sex chats on the Orthodoxy podcast? That doesn't make any sense. And I'll tie it all together because I actually do think it makes a lot of sense. And I know I said, I think it was like a year ago now when I put my podcast out, talking about kind of taking this podcast into a different direction, talking to different theological thinkers, but then also throwing political things into the mix and doing some more straight to camera stuff like I'm doing right now. This is kind of in that political realm, but we're going to talk about theological things. We're actually going to talk about the church and how this all ties together. And so the whole goal of Orthodoxy is, how do you think Orthodox? Like, how do you think Orthodox? How does our Orthodox biblical perspective impact the way that we think about everything in our life, whether that be politics or our relationships or, dating or whatever it is? How do we think consistently and comprehensively like a Christian, because I don't believe that you can compartmentalize and go to church on Sunday and then go and vote some way and then go and, have a relationship with somebody that's immoral. Like, I think that you actually have to live like a Christian if you're going to call yourself a Christian. And that involves all realms of thought: politics, philosophy, economics, theology, everything. Everything has to be Christian because we're Christians. And there has been a lie for my lifetime, and it's been an explicit lie at certain points. Certain theological, pastoral, Christian thought leaders have pushed this lie explicitly, that you sort of can compartmentalize your political belief systems and your economic belief systems from your Christian belief system and kind of have different ways of thinking. Here at church, I'm a Christian, but when I'm at school, I'm a Marxist. And when I'm at home, I'm a homosexual. Like, no, you can't actually do that. You have to have a comprehensive biblical worldview. And so that's the goal of this podcast. So things like this, podcasts like this, we talk about the NSA sex chats, chat rooms, chat groups. This is, I think, all within the realm of Christian thought. We have to actually know what's happening in the world around us, and then we actually have to think about it like a Christian. And this story struck me as like very, very important, very prominent. And I think it points us toward a deeper reality that I think is going to make itself manifest as the years go by and as more and more corruption starts to come up. Because I don't actually just think this is happening at the governmental level. I think this is happening from the top down and from the bottom up, because I think we live in an immoral society. So that said, that's why we're talking about this today. Christopher Rufo, Hannah Grossman broke a huge story on Tuesday about sex chats attached to the National Security Agency. Two reasons that I want to talk about this. The first one is because this is what the Democrats wanted us to vote for, and it's indicative of a much larger issue in society, sort of what I just said before. The second reason is because if you're a pastor, and if your pastor at any point during the election cycle said that it's okay and permissible to vote for Democrats as a confessing Christian, this is what they were advocating for. This is the ideology. This is what comes of this ideology. And I wanted to talk about why this sort of story, which we're going to be seeing a lot more of this. We have the USAID stuff that's been happening, and all of the horrible things that have been coming to light due to people like Elon Musk and Trump and the new administration going in there and trying to get rid of the nonsense and figure out what sort of totalitarian, sick, evil, terrible things were happening behind closed doors. Well, now we're actually getting some insight into what's been happening in the government, and it's horrible. And so I want to talk about just the fact that there were so many pastors, so many prominent Christian leaders and thinkers who told people, you can vote for Democrats, you can vote for Republicans. It's no problem. They're morally equivalent. There's nothing wrong with voting for Democrats. So we're going to talk about that. But first, I'm going to quote the article. Like I said before, some of this stuff is graphic. You might not want your kids listening to this. You shouldn't want your kids listening to this. That's what I'll say. You shouldn't want them listening to it. But here is a quote from the article. It says, "We have cultivated sources within the National Security Agency, one current employee and one former employee, who have provided chat logs from the NSA's Intel Link messaging program. According to an NSA press official, quote, all NSA employees sign agreements stating that publishing non-mission related material in Interlink is a usage violation and will result in disciplinary action. Nonetheless, these logs dating back 2 years are lurid, featuring wide-ranging discussions of sex, kink, polyamory, and castration." All right, so basically what this is saying is that employees within the NSA dating back 2 years have been using private chats within the NSA to talk about sex, kinks, polyamory, and castration, even though the NSA claims that employees aren't allowed to use internal chats to discuss non-mission related material. There are a whole bunch of problems here, but we'll break it down in a minute after I get through reading some more of the story. So I'm just going to kind of go chunk by chunk, and then I'm going to go back and explain sort of my thoughts on each chunk. So that's the first thing. So you have these sex chats, these chat rooms within the NSA community that are talking about sex, kink, polyamory, and castration. It's absolutely insane, and it actually just gets worse. So here's what it says. It says, one popular chat topic was male to female transgender surgery, which involves surgically removing the penis and turning it into an artificial vagina. Quote, "Mine is everything," said one male who claimed to have had gender reconstruction surgery. Quote, "I found that I like being penetrated. Never liked it before surgery, but all the rest is just as important as well." Another intelligence official boasted that genital surgery allowed him to, quote, "wear leggings or bikinis without having to wear a gaff under it." I should have looked up what a gaff is. I have no clue what a gaff is, but it sounds terrible. So that's a little bit more. And obviously the full article is in the link in the description, but I'm just reading some of the main points and pieces here. It says here, according to our sources, the sex chats were legitimized as part of the NSA's commitment to, quote, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Activists within the agency used LGBTQ plus employee resource groups to turn their kinks and pathologies into official work duties. And finally, it says the NSA sources also raised the question of some staffers' mental fitness for the job. In one chat, an NSA employee insists on using, quote, it pronouns in lieu of the human he or she pronouns. Quote, its user here. So this is a person talking, its user here. While I understand, we can make some people uncomfortable, keep in mind that the dehumanizing aspect either A, doesn't apply, or B, is a positive effect when we're requesting it. A commenter who disagreed was quickly dismissed by employees of the NSA and CIA who claimed that refusing to use its pronouns amounted to erasing a transgender identity. All right, so this is the gist of this story. A bunch of horrible debauchery here, a bunch of terrible, terrible things. And there's like multiple layers of problems with this story. We could get into the fact that they're just stealing people's tax dollars to pay these people to do nothing and have conversations about their sick and perverted sex fetishes. That's one problem. And I think that that's pretty self-evident. I don't think that we need to talk about that. I think most people who are thinking people are going to be able to figure that out and be very frustrated with it. But going back to that first quote that talks just generally about what's been happening using these Intel messaging program through the NSA to have conversations about sex, kink, polyamory, and castration. So there are so many problems here and so much that we can learn from this. I think the first thing that we need to take away, though, is that most of these organizations are run by liars. And that I know it might seem trivial. And some of the things I'm going to say in this podcast you might just be like, yeah, well, duh. But it's important. And we need to not just look to the government and be like, oh, yeah, this is just happening in the government. This is just out there. This is just in Washington. It's not here. It's not home. It's not at my church. It's not in my business. It's not at my workplace. It's not in my school. No, I think that it is. And I'll make the argument as we go further. But the first thing is that most of these organizations are run by liars. Obviously, the policy and public facing jargon is all a lie, right? The NSA claims that chats within the company are not supposed to be used for any communication that isn't mission focused. I know this is revolutionary for some, but in the modern times, you cannot believe the jargon and outward facing messages that most political entities are saying, political or non-political, actually. Whether it's an organization or a nonprofit or a government agency or a church or a business, whatever it is, oftentimes I think people are coming to grips with this. A lot of the outward facing, external facing messaging that you're hearing from these people and from these businesses are not actually indicative of what's happening inside the organization, the business, the church, whatever it is. And that is called lying. That's actually what we call that. You call that lying. So you go out and you say, hey, we don't let anybody do anything that is outside of our mission and our focus as an agency, except for, people who are talking about kinks and polyamory and castration and transgenderism and making everybody call them an it's or whatever it is, but they don't mention that. They just say, we're mission focused. We care about what we're doing. We have a vision and a goal and a mission, and we want to make sure that we are talking about that in our chats. Well, that's obviously a lie. That's not what's been happening for 2 years here. And they just blatantly are okay with lying. These people running these organizations understand the significance and prestige of the institution and are absolutely willing to lie to the public while at the same time pushing a narrative within the institution that is completely contrary to the public message. This is called lying, and lying is bad. And this is happening at all levels of society. It's not just happening in the government. I know a lot of people like to say all my problems come from the government or all the issues in the world are government related, but that's just not true. Actually, all the issues in the world are related to evil, and there's evil in the government. There's also evil in you and I. And so where it's not just the government. So this is really bad. And this is a massive sort of picture of what is happening. But I'll continue into my next point, and we'll discuss this a little bit more. So this ideology that many churches, and so that's where I'm getting into sort of the theological Christian realm, because I think we have to be able to think as Christians and look at these stories and say, okay, if this is happening at that level, could it potentially be happening at my level? Could it happen at my church? Could it happen in my institution, organization, my school? This is the ideology that many churches, pastors, and so-called Christian organizations advocated for or were passive of in the midst of the 2024 election cycle, right? This liberal sort of sexual identity. Institutions like Christianity Today, uh, institutions like Christianity Today hosted a miniseries by David French called Stop, Look, Listen. These names are so lame. Stop, look, listen. Sounds like when I was in kindergarten and they were trying to teach us how to, not get run over by a car, stop, look, listen, look both ways, so, and that's what these people think of you, by the way. People like David French and the Christianity Today people, they think you're an infant and they think you're 6 and they talk to you like you're a child because they think you're stupid and they think they're the elites and you're an idiot. And so you should just stop, look, listen. They kind of talk to you like you're a little infant. It's actually, we don't even talk to, I have a 2-year-old and a 1-year-old. We don't even talk to him that way. Stop, look, listen. Okay. Anyways, I'll move on from that, but that stuff bothers me. So David French, who is a Democrat, he's a liberal. He has deceived himself into thinking that he's a Christian. He's obviously not a Christian. He hosted on this podcast, this mini series, he hosted Christians, I'm doing air quotes, Christians, who are voting for different parties in the upcoming election, Libertarian, Democrat, Republican. He hosts these people and he talks to them and tries to basically create an atmosphere in which the listener would think it is okay to vote for whoever. There are good Christians who vote for anybody, and so that was that podcast. That was Christianity Today. And you could also look at the Gospel Coalition. They had an article, I think the day before Election Day or maybe Election Day, about being hopeful and happy, about being hopeful and happy, and that we need to see the good before Election Day and blah, 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 blah. So I'm going to read a quote from this article. It says this, quote, "No matter what happens tomorrow, focus on the good you see around you. Focus on the good you see around you. And praise God for it. And before you blast the other side on social media for wanting to murder babies," I'm just kidding, that part's not a part of it, not the murdering babies thing, sorry, "or condemn the motives of other voters, examine your heart, and recognize that the good in you is also a gift of God's grace." This is called gaslighting, and this is evil. It's obviously wrong. There's no logic here. And I would encourage people to go read the rest of the article, but it's just more of this nonsense. And again, for people like, okay, why are we talking about Gospel Coalition and Christianity Today? It's because these people, these institutions, these so-called Christian organizations were trying to make it normal, good, even biblical to vote for Democrats who wanted to put people into positions of authority to steal American tax dollars, to talk on group chats within the National Security Agency about their kinks and polyamory and their transgender ideology, and to push a sexual ideology within an organization that is built for security, not built for social sexual perversion. All right. These people, and they know this stuff. David French knows this nonsense. They know the ideologies. They know the philosophies. They know the stuff. And the pastors know it too. And your pastor, if he's one of these guys who tries to, or girls, if there's a woman who thinks that she's a pastor, if they're trying to make the case that it doesn't matter who you vote for, that you can vote for anybody, that everybody is a Christian, or everybody in our church is a Christian, and we shouldn't divide over politics because politics are bad. These people are essentially implicitly saying that this behavior, this ideology is permissible, that you can have this ideology and call yourself a Christian. And obviously the reality, according to Jesus Christ and the Bible, is no, you can't. You actually have to live consistently. You have to live like a Christian. You have to be a Christian. You have to act like a Christian. You have to vote like a Christian. You have to do everything as if you're a Christian because you're a Christian. If you're claiming to be a Christian, you're a Christian. I'm not saying that you are a Christian if you're claiming to be Christian, but if you're claiming to be Christian, you have to live like a Christian. And if you truly are a Christian, you will want to do that. You will want to live like a Christian. And yet these organizations and these liberal shills like David French and there are others are telling millions and millions of, I don't actually know how many people read Christianity Today and the Gospel Coalition, but I think probably millions, maybe it's gone down. I hope it's gone down because both of those organizations are just insufferable to listen to and to read. But telling these people that this behavior, voting for this stuff is permissible. That's just inconsistent with the Bible. And people need to start to see this stuff. So this is called gaslighting, right? It's called gaslighting. Yeah. And, it reminds me of a story from World War II, actually, believe it or not, in the rise of Hitler and the Third Reich. Now, you may not know this, but the Gospel Coalition was around at this time, and they released an article prior to the election of Hitler and said that we need to not blast anyone we disagree with politically because God is good and we have grace. So if your friend wants to vote for the slaughter of millions of innocent Jews, they should. And you should shut your mouth. Obviously, that's not a real story, but that is the equivalent to what's happening here today. And people can get mad all they want, but we are murdering babies at a rate that no civilization in history has ever murdered babies. Like we are slaughtering them. We're cutting their limbs off their body. We're cutting their heads off. We're poisoning them as a society. And the Democrats want that to happen. Late-term abortions in Minnesota, where they just put a baby, not full-term baby, the doctor's holding the baby, and the mother doesn't want the baby, so they put the baby in a room by itself and they let it die. That's what they do. A live baby. That's happened 10 times in the past, 9 or 10 times in the past, like 5 to 10 years in Minnesota. I'm going to fact check myself on that, but I'm pretty sure that that's the case. And I'll put the link in the description to the actual study, and not the study, but the actual government documentation on that. But that's happening in Minnesota. I think that's happening. I think it's happening in New York. These people they've outdone Hitler in slaughtering human beings, murdering human beings. And organizations like Christianity Today and the Gospel Coalition, millions of churches across the country who are pretending to be Christians are telling people during the election cycles that you can be a Christian and vote Democrat. You can be a Christian and vote for whoever you want. It doesn't matter. There's no moral responsibility, and each side is good. And there's faults on both sides. Both sides just have problems. And so, no, that's not true. One side doesn't want to slaughter a bunch of innocent babies. The other side is slaughtering innocent babies. On top of that, cutting up children who already exist and, cutting their breast off, cutting their penises off because of an ideology that's been forced on them in the public school system. These kids are 6, 7, 8 years old. They don't even know what they believe in. And, they're confused. And they say to their parents, I think I'm a girl or whatever. I think I'm a boy. And parents sign off on a bunch of drugs that change their hormones and destroy their life and cut their genitals off because what? Because God has grace. Yeah. Okay. Because God has grace. Don't judge. Don't say anything bad about that. Don't say anything bad about people in your church who are doing that. Don't say anything bad about your pastor who's promoting that or being passive and not talking. But don't do that. Don't talk about it. Gospel Coalition said that before you say anything about anything politically, before you ever try to talk about morality, you need to the first thing that you need to do is make sure that you check your heart. Which is, I don't even know what that means. You should probably check in the Bible. You should probably check the Bible and say, what is good? What does God say is good and right and moral? This stuff gets me angry. This stuff is it's just horrible. And there's actually no, actually a lot of theologians, a lot of prominent theologians would have certainly called these pastors out during this election cycle. Think of Dietrich Bonhoeffer trying to tell the church who was just going along to get along with Hitler. And he's trying to call them out to them. We need to do something about this. This is a problem. And, people said things like, you're conflating, politics and, they said all these things, but he actually had a moral backbone. He actually could see a real problem in front of his face. And he had a living theological conviction and a living gospel conviction. And he didn't want to see people murdered because he was a Christian. And so he did something about it. He tried to stop it, and he was ultimately killed for that. Or I've talked about earlier in a previous podcast about a quote from Spurgeon about slavery and him calling for civil war in America to end slavery, calling for civil war as the most prominent pastor in the world at the time. He calls for civil war, and all of the American publications that published all of his sermons every week that were going out to the United States and all over the world, they started cutting out his in his sermons, they would start cutting out the things that he said against slavery. And he told them to stop publishing him, and he lost a bunch of money for that. But he's called for a civil war. He said maybe they'll figure out that this is immoral, when they're staring down the end of a bayonet. And the Gospel Coalition and Christianity Today, which is obviously just a terrible name. It's communism today. I don't know what else you could call it. Whatever. It's not Christianity. That's a terrible, terrible name. They think that, just turn a blind eye. Just shut your mouth. Shut up, you stupid peasant. We're the elites. You're stupid. You can't understand anything. Stop, look, listen. You're stupid. And if your pastor's talking this way, there are pastors talking this way. There's one of the most prominent evangelical churches in America right here in Madison, Wisconsin, where I live. Thousands and thousands, maybe 10,000. I don't know how many people go to the church. A lot of people go to the church. It's an evangelical free church. It's Blackhawk Church, and they've got multiple campuses. And this is their rhetoric. Their rhetoric is be a passive, spineless, immoral Christian, pretend to be, and never say anything to anybody ever about politics, because that's not loving. That's their argument. It's a ridiculous argument. And then they're in their youth group telling people, they're calling kids by their preferred pronouns. Like that's how this relates to this nonsense, this NSA sex chat. This is indicative of a deep, deep, deep problem in these people, their philosophy and what they actually believe in. You can tell by what they're doing, what they're saying. And so this is happening in the church. You have pastors who are promoting this stuff publicly, who are trying to create a moral equivalent between the Republicans and Democrats. It's just not true. There's not a moral equivalent. Maybe 50, 60 years ago, maybe, not now. And so people need to kind of wake up to this. I think people are waking up to this. I don't see it as much in Madison because I think Madison's like a terrible liberal cesspool. But I think around the country, people are saying, holy crap, there's been terrible things happening behind that have been covered up for years and years and years. And it's all rooted in just liberal sexual ideology. And it's horrible, terrible stuff. And it's dehumanizing. It's just a terrible thing. And so if you're still at a church and your pastor is equivocating and telling you that you can believe things that are contrary to the gospel, you should call that pastor out, or you should leave that church. I don't think sticking around and lying to yourself about, oh, we go to a Christian church. No, you don't go to a Christian church. There are babies being slaughtered every single day. And there are kids being butchered every single day. This stuff was happening for years. And now it's all coming out. And anybody who says anything close to what I'm saying right now, people just call people who say what I'm saying Christian nationalists, which isn't even, you have to define your terms, but it's not even true. I just don't want our country to be a completely depraved, sexually perverse country full of people who are abusing positions of authority and power, and filled with thousands of churches, millions of churches and pastors and churchgoers who turn a blind eye to things because they don't want to deal with problems because they're cowards. I don't want that to be the case. Call me a Christian nationalist. I don't know what Well, I guess if that's what a Christian nationalist is, I'm a Christian nationalist, okay? But I just don't want this stuff to be happening. I don't want to spend my money on this stuff. And I think it's bad for people. And I think it's bad for churches. I don't think you should be giving your money to churches who are doing this stuff. Obviously, I left a church because this is what they were promoting. And they were lying and gaslighting constantly from the pulpit and at their little stupid meetings with everybody, the congregational meetings there, and they were just saying to people, no, don't believe your eyes. Don't believe your ears. You're stupid. We're smart. You're an idiot. We're smart. We'll tell you what to believe. We'll tell you what to do. Don't read the Bible for yourself. That's not what it means. That's not what the Bible means. No, actually, in the Bible, you can support people. You can partner with people and commune with people who think that slaughtering babies and butchering kids is actually good. You have to reinterpret blah, 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 blah. That's what they do. They just equivocate and pontificate. And this stuff's coming to light. We have to talk about it. I think Christians need to talk about it. Like, you should be seeing patterns. You should be figuring out how to think through this stuff. And so we'll move on from this. But obviously, that's a huge problem, and it connects to the church. Because it's about morality. And the church is about morality. That's what the church is about. It's about salvation, and it's about living as moral Christians and for the glory of God. And you can't do that when you're advocating for babies to be decapitated, which is what you're doing if you're voting for Democrats. That's just a fact, and there's no way to get around that. All right, so that next section that I read, talking about popular chat topics being male to female transgender surgeries, talking about removing the penis, turning it into an artificial vagina. They're talking about, the people in the group chats are talking about how they love being, penetrated and whatnot. It's just horrible. It's terrible stuff. But obviously this is what we're talking about here. So these are real people. And real exchanges, and are obviously indicative of the liberal ideology. People need to understand that this sort of stuff is happening behind the scenes everywhere at all levels of government and in the private sector, because these actions are justified through the belief of a certain worldview. So this isn't just arbitrarily happening out of nowhere. People just wake up one day and they're like, oh, I want to become trans, or I'm going to tell everybody about my weird transgender kink, my weird fetish. It's just not like something that just happens one day. It's indicative of a deep-seated negative, sort of negative liberal ideology. This ideology that I can do what I want, whenever I want, with whomever I want, however I want, and whenever I want. I can do. This is what life is about. This is the purpose of life, is to do what I want. And we know as Christians that human beings are depraved. They're evil at their core. And when human beings do what they want, they do bad things. That's a problem. That's the problem with people. Like, that's our problem. And we need a savior, and we need Christ to actually turn us into a new creation and to save us from our wickedness, so that we don't end up like this. So we don't do this sort of stuff. This is what we don't want to be like. It's indicative of a deeper worldview. And people know that, but we need to be able to articulate that as Christians. Like, this is the liberal, expressive, individualist, postmodern ideology. This is what happens. This is what happens when it comes to fruition. This is how things turn out. This is what society looks like. This is what people do behind closed doors. And now, I mean, it's becoming, in a lot of places where it's actually just not behind closed doors. It's just everywhere. And it's really bad. I mean, it's almost like when you tell an entire society that their identity is their sexual fetish, and then feed them porn online and in movies for decades. It's almost like when you do that for decades, they act like porn addicted sociopaths in the workplace and at home. It's almost like you tell a kid from the age of 0 till they're 30 that their whole life is about doing whatever they want, and that their sexuality, what they feel sexually, is their identity. Like, you tell them that for like 30 years, people shouldn't be shocked at what's happening. Then you just feed them a bunch of porn. Like, the average age, it probably has dropped. This was like 3 or 4 years ago. The average age of a boy seeing porn for the first time was 6 years old. They haven't even hit puberty. They're just watching porn. Like, that's horrible. That's ridiculous. All right, so here's a study from Psychology Today that says using It says, using a set of metrics that include indicators of monthly unique visitors as well as monthly page views, the authors found that the top 3 pornography sites are more highly ranked than the most well-known household sites, Amazon, Netflix, Yahoo, as well as those that are the most up and coming, TikTok, OpenAI, ChatGPT, Zoom. Exactly how great is this disparity? In a word, huge, huge. X videos, the top ranked pornography site, had 700 million more total visits than Amazon, and 900 million, 1.1 billion, 1.3 billion, 1.5 billion, and 1.8 billion more total visits than TikTok, OpenAI, LinkedIn, Netflix, and the Weather Channel, respectively. The authors also looked at bounce rates, which indicate the percentage of visitors who leave a website after only viewing the one page. They found that pornography sites, Xvideos, Pornhub, XNXX, and Xhamster, had lower bounce rates than non-pornographic sites. They also found that the pornography sites XNXX and Pornhub had higher pages per visit figures than non-pornographic sites. In other words, not only do people visit porn sites more often than non-porn sites, but they tend to stick around once they're there. They stay there, which is crazy if you think about it, because some of these websites that they're comparing to, Netflix, Amazon, like people go there to watch movies, like 2.5-hour movies. Like I watch Oppenheimer, it's like 3 hours. I probably watch that like 6 times a month, on Amazon. I bought it because it's one of the best movies of all time. I skipped the sex scenes. I know. I guess people are going to be like, wow, that's you're a hypocrite. But I skipped this. I don't even watch those. I think they're terrible. I don't know why I put those in there. People go to these websites to watch movies. Like that's what they're doing. That's the whole point of to watch TV. They binge TV shows. And Pornhub and Xvideo, these porn websites are still out doing them. Like this, I mean, this is the society that we've created. Ones that liberals have been pushing for decades. If not centuries. It depends on how you look at all the philosophy and whatnot. But it's hard to even know what to talk about here because this is just so horrible. I mean, those numbers are terrible. 1.1 billion, 1.3 billion, 1.58 billion, 1.5 billion, 1.8 billion more total visits than TikTok, OpenAI, LinkedIn, Netflix, and the Weather Channel. The Weather Channel. People are looking at porn more than they're trying to figure out what the weather is outside. Like they interact with there's a window right over here. I have to interact with the weather every day, and I check the weather every morning. I check the weather, but people are like gotta check Pornhub. I think a lot of Christians have turned such a blind eye to these problems for a long, long, long time. Because Christianity, especially low church evangelical Christianity in America, has become some economic superpower. There's a lot of money in it. And so, after the Billy Graham age where, things blew up and evangelicalism became kind of more popular and you had, Christian music and things, there's a lot of money behind it. You don't really hear... Because you got to get people to come to these events. You got to get people to come to your big event, your big quote unquote gospel event. You got to get people to come. And so you can't do that if you're telling people to stop watching porn. Hey, America, stop watching 1.8 billion visits. Stop going on there 1.8 billion times, more than you go to Netflix. Like what? You can't bring people into your events when you're actually telling them to stop doing the thing that they love, the thing that their society has told them 24/7 for decades and decades and decades to do. So the church just turned a blind eye to it because they didn't know how to deal with it. And this is the result of that we have people in all levels of society. I mean, that's not just the people in the government watching porn, right? People know this. Everybody's watching porn. It's like 99% of men are addicted to porn. More women are addicted to porn now. How is that even possible? I know how it's possible. We could go through the full philosophy. We could talk about why this is happening, but I don't. I've done that a million times in this podcast. We talked to different thinkers, theologians, political philosophers, and we're going to continue to do that. But this is a massive, massive problem. We have a bunch of porn addicted people, kids with smartphones watching this stuff with parents who hate them, who are neglecting them, giving them a smartphone, giving them access to the internet, being idiots. Like, if you're doing that as a parent, you're a terrible parent. You're a horrible parent, and you should stop it. And you should take your kid's phone away, and don't believe them when they tell you they're not watching porn, because they're lying to you, because they think you're stupid, because a lot of you are, because you gave your kids phones to begin with. Like, I know, I'm Gen Z. I know this. I grew up in this generation. I did this stuff. This is what I did. I was like, oh, these people are idiots. All you have to do is just tell them in the church, you just be like, yeah, I'm not doing that. And they'll be like, oh, good. Check. You're like, oh yeah, all you have to do is just lie to them, because they don't care. Just like tell them, yeah, I don't watch porn anymore. Oh, good. That's another number. Look, 100 men have been freed from porn. It's like, no, that's not true. Actually, it's not true at all. There are churches who don't even have porn addicted. They don't even have groups for that. It's just horrible. So that's a problem. Again, I'm trying to connect these things because people should be opening their eyes and seeing a problem right now in society, that it's not just a problem in the government. It's happening where you are, probably. There's like a 99% chance that this stuff is happening behind closed doors, because that's what the statistics tell us. Okay. Pastors are watching porn. People are watching porn, and porn destroys your brain. We all know this, and it's very difficult to get off of it. It destroys your brain, and it destroys it in a multitude of ways. I mean, we've all met these people. I know these people. They're horrible to talk to. I talk about, with some people I have in the past, talked about different movies, and there's just certain genres that I can't watch horror movies, because there's so much evil, demonic, satanic stuff in those movies. And I don't think that it's just for entertainment. I just think it's for fun. I think it's actually immoral to watch that stuff. And I think it's biblically immoral. You shouldn't be feeding yourself that nonsense, because it's not godly. And you talk to people, like I've talked to people, maybe you haven't talked to people. I've talked to people, young people who call themselves Christians. I'm not entirely sure if they are. And they watch a bunch of horror movies. I'm like, does that not affect you mentally? Like, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. Like, I can't sleep at night if I hear like a creaking in the house. I start to get like, somebody's here, I got to go do something about it. But if I was watching horror movies all the time, I couldn't sleep at night. And you've heard these people, they just say, well, it doesn't affect me. It just doesn't affect me. It doesn't affect me. Yeah. Do you know why it doesn't affect you? Because you've seared your conscience in that regard. Because you've severed your ability to understand the immorality of the thing that you're engaging with, because you've engaged with it so much. You're not unique. You're not a unique person. You didn't find the way to engage with sin and not have the effects of it. You didn't figure that out. No, you're just incredibly immoral. That's our society with porn. Everybody's like, it doesn't affect me. People are like, it doesn't affect me. Porn doesn't affect me. Yeah, it does. It actually does affect you. Obviously, the freaking National Security Agency in the United States has a bunch of sex chats. Like, if it didn't affect you, you wouldn't have to talk about it all the time. You wouldn't have to have sex chat rooms. You wouldn't have to, if it didn't affect you, you wouldn't be thinking about it all the time, because you are. People are thinking about it all the time. So this is a result of what we're teaching, and what our society is teaching, what the church is actually teaching too. And I'm just going to reiterate this. If you have a pastor or a church that is sympathetic to this degeneracy, to this liberalism, to this progressivism, to this sexual ideology, you're not going to a Christian church, right? What people do is indicative of what they believe. Not all the time. Obviously, Christians still sin. We're still in the war with sin. We have indwelling sin. But if it's a philosophical presupposition, you're not a Christian. If this is what your identity is built on, you're not a Christian. I'm sorry. The Christian identity, I'm not sorry. I don't know why I said that. Your Christian identity is built on the new creation that Christ has given you through the gospel, through the cross. And so your identity isn't in this sexual stuff. And it's hard. I mean, I know how hard it is to have that mind shift because I was sexually addicted, hardcore. Porn, it was horrible. And you have to turn away. You have to allow for the gospel in a supernatural, revelatory way to turn you towards what is good and righteous and in line with the gospel. And that's a revelation. It's a supernatural thing that happens. But you can't bring your sexual identity with you. That dies. That has to die, actually. No matter if it's a heterosexual addiction or homosexual, whatever, I don't care what it is. And that has to die. And so, or you're not a Christian. It's the rich young ruler. Jesus went after the very thing that he held most high, which was his money. And people like to just isolate that and say, well, that just means that being rich is bad. I don't actually think that's true. I think Jesus came across a decent amount of rich people and didn't say the same thing that he said to this rich young ruler. No, what the principle was there is that Jesus Christ knew that this man loved money more than anything, and so he told him to sell his money, right? Our society loves sex more than anything. And so what it needs to get rid of is its sexual fetishes, its sexual identity, its sexual ideology, its sexual perversions and addictions. That's what it needs to get rid of and repent of and follow Jesus. All right, I'll move on. This is a quote. According to our sources, the sex chats were legitimized as part of the NSA's commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. No surprise. Activists within the agency use the LGBTQ plus employee resource groups to turn their kinks and pathologies into official work duties. If your company, organization, church, or institution is using language like diversity, equity, and inclusion, you need to basically get out or speak up. I mean, I feel like this is popular enough now. The DEI stuff is so mainstream now. So many people don't like it that there's like code stuff, now there's like code words, code language around it. I think obviously Madison being a church, city that's farther ahead in progressivism than the rest of the country. You start hearing a lot about integration, cultural integration, just sort of this. I mean, I see this in white churches, this hypocritical. I remember at the church this is the most ridiculous thing, but the church that I went to, we would sing 98% white people, right? Like this was totally white, rich, stereotypical white church, which I don't have a problem with white people going to a church and black people going to a church that they like to worship, better. Like I don't have a problem with that. I don't think we need to integrate in that way. I don't think that you need to force integration. If a black person wants to go to a church that's primarily white, then great. If a white person wants to go to a church that's primarily black, then great. I don't think we need to force it. I think that that's weird. But they were having us sing, the worship leader was having us sing in Spanish. So that's called virtue signaling. It's so weird. You have a bunch of white people singing in Spanish. All right. So yeah, if your church is doing this stuff, the DEI stuff, then you should get out or speak up and change it if they're trying to push racial diversity, sexual diversity. If they're talking about equity a lot, there are some Bible verses, passages that talk about equity, but it's not in the same way that the liberals talk about it. And if they're talking about inclusion in a way that we need to be inclusive toward people who are unrepentant and sinning, and allow for those people to help make decisions in the church and to have positions of leadership and authority, again, these words are difficult because they're, like I've talked about in previous podcasts, language matters, words matter, they have definitions. And so words like inclusion, you're like, yeah, you want to include non-Christians. You would hope they would come to your church. I mean, I think that the job of the church is to equip the saints. I actually don't think it's evangelistic. I think that the job is you equip them to go out and do evangelism. So I think in a ideal situation, you're going to have less non-Christians coming to a church. It's actually for equipping of the saints, for building up in the faith. It's for you to engage in the sacraments and to be filled once a week. I mean, I think it should be more than that, but at the very least once a week, and then go out and do the good works of evangelism. But if you have some random person come to your church on a Sunday and they're not a Christian, like I don't think you kick them out, but you obviously don't let them take communion or or anything like that. That said, you know, the inclusion language is difficult. You want to include non-Christians, like you want them to repent and then become part of the church, be adopted into the family. But you don't want to include people who aren't in the family on matters that are directly related to the doctrine of the family, that are directly related to the teachings of the family, to this religious institution that is the church. Like, you can't let people who aren't Christians make these decisions. And so the language is tricky, but we have to be careful. It's turning out that people using this language are always up to something bad. Usually, I think, because it's kind of a part of a philosophical constellation, the DEI stuff is always attached to the LGBTQ stuff. It's always attached to sexual degeneracy happening behind closed doors or within closed chat rooms. If your boss, pastor, or head of your organization is supporting this and giving money to it or implementing it, you can't be quiet. You have a moral and biblical obligation to say something. The DEI ideology is always attached to the LGBTQ ideology, because it's part of liberalism. And liberalism is the parent philosophy that produces these other philosophies like LGBTQ, like DEI. It's all part of the same thing. When you start hearing, and you can get into the psychological conversation too about the psychological language, because these things are all connected. They're all birthed out of liberalism. Do what I want, when I want, however I want, with whomever I want, which we would just call sin as Christians, and people trying to be their own gods. That's what we would call that as Christians. Doing whatever you want, whenever you want. That's called sin. As a non-Christian, oftentimes for people, it's even as a Christian, like you have to repress your evil desires and your sin, and you have to kill your sin. And so doing that is wrong, and it's evil, and it's against God's command for our life. It's also against human flourishing. You're going to have a worse life if you just do whatever you want. You're going to have a good, fulfilling, prosperous life. I'm not talking financially prosperous. I'm saying you're going to have kids, you're going to have meaning, you're going to have fullness and purpose if you do what God tells you to do. But that means that you have to go to war with yourself. You have to go to war with what's evil inside of you. And this language is totally against that. Like, this language hates that, because at the core of liberalism, at the core of diversity, equity, and inclusion, LGBTQ, the modern psychological movement, is a bitter hatred for redemption. These people hate redemption. They don't want to see people redeemed and changed and have a better life and a flourishing life. They hate it. They hate it because it's self-destruct. Their ideology is self-destructive. They want to destroy themselves. I mean, look at this. The last thing that I read, talking about this employee who wanted to be called it's. I mean, like, people laugh at this stuff and they mock it, and I get it. But that's a tragedy, that a human being has degraded themselves and dehumanized themselves and have been dehumanized by their teachers, parents, coaches, pastors for so long that now they want people to publicly dehumanize them by calling them an it. That's a terrible, terrible tragedy. And people like that oftentimes end up offing themselves, shooting themselves in the head, killing themselves because of it, because they've so deeply degraded their own self that they hate themselves. I mean, that's why young people are killing themselves at rates we've never seen before, because that's what this stuff produces. It's not a joke. It's not a joke. Like, if your pastors, I mean, this is why I wanted to do this podcast. If your pastors aren't speaking about this, they're cowards, and they're not Christians, and they don't care about the gospel, and they hate redemption. Because it turns out that the gospel is for people who are sinners, who Christ believes, and who God created to be redeemed for human flourishing, to live with God in eternity. Like, it's for redemption that we believe in Jesus Christ. And these people can be redeemed, but they're not going to be redeemed if nobody ever talks to them about the sin that they're engaging in. And if pastors don't do anything about it, if they don't speak up about it, if they don't tell their congregants, no, you can't vote for people who want to murder babies because we love babies, we love human beings are good. If you don't do that, your pastor isn't a Christian. Your pastor is telling you, when he doesn't speak about this, he's saying to you, I don't believe in redemption. I don't believe you can be redeemed. I don't believe anybody can be redeemed. And I don't actually care about redemption. What I care about is building my platform, building my personal ministry, building my name. I could give a trash about Jesus. I'll use Jesus to get me where I want to go. But once Jesus starts talking this nonsense about redemption and human flourishing, no. I need these people in my congregation to be sycophants and to be worshiping me, because I'm a narcissistic, self-involved golden calf, and I worship myself every single day, and I want everybody else to do that. I'm a sinner. And that's what your pastor's saying to you. I don't know what people are going to say. I don't really care. That's what happens when you worship the God of liberalism, which is the God of self. You put yourself above the God of the universe, and it causes chaos and destruction, dehumanization, confusion, and ultimately it just causes death. It causes massive amounts of death. The recorded number is 60 million babies murdered in 60 years. That's the recorded number. It's probably hundreds of millions slaughtered. You have the IVF babies, 1 million. Like I talked with Leah Savas in the previous podcast, 1 million babies that are apparently commodities to a lot of people, just stuck in freezers in the United States, I think alone. Maybe I think it's just the United States. They're just stuck. They're just there. But yeah, let's not talk about politics. Policy doesn't matter. Politics is bad. Remember the great words of, hopefully a dying, pathetic institution called the Gospel Coalition, right? Remember how these people gaslit you, and your pastors gaslit you for wanting to have a consistent Christian worldview, to have a theological conviction that affects your political ideology. These people gaslit and they lied to you, and they told you, shut your stupid mouth. You listen to us. You're not redeemable. Nobody else is redeemable. And we don't want them to be redeemable, because if they were redeemed, they'd stop listening to me. They'd stop giving me their money. They'd stop giving me their attention. They'd stop buying my book, stop listening to my podcast. Like, I don't, yeah, I don't know. Sorry, I at the end of what I've written, I didn't write all that, but as I think about it, it's just a sad, terrible thing. And it's like, I've noticed this trend for a while. Just the idea that the liberal ideology ultimately is built in this idea that human beings are irredeemable, which is just the most tragic, terrible thing that you can possibly imagine. Like it's redemption that is at the core of the gospel, right? Like, let's remember that as Christians, Christ came to redeem sinners who deserved the eternal wrath of God in conscious torment in hell for all eternity. That's what we deserve, because we've rejected Christ and because we've put ourselves above him. And he came to redeem us and to change us from that, and to create and to make us into new creatures, whole creatures, comprehensive creatures, theologically thinking creatures, politically thinking creatures. He gave us this ability as Christians to have the best, most full, comprehensive understanding of the world that we live in, because we know the God who created it and the people around us, because we know the God who created them. It's like, go do good things for these people. Go be good. Go do good things. Go do things that are according to God's will. And the American churches are tossing a middle finger to God, saying, no, screw you. We don't want these people to be redeemed. We don't want the trans people to be redeemed. We don't want the babies to stop being murdered. No, screw you. Because if we have to tell these people, if we have to actually say that stuff, then these people who actually love murdering babies, they're going to stop coming to our church. We're going to stop having the prestige. People are going to stop listening to us. They're going to stop caring about what we have to say. So no, we don't want redemption. No, we don't want redemption. We're going to lie. We're going to use all these words. We're going to psychological integration with with theology. We're going to pretend like we want redemption by sitting in rooms with people who have mental problems, and with people who are deeply embedded in sin, and over psychoanalyzing their life and giving them reason to sever relationships with people in their life that actually matter. Like, that's what the modern psychological movement is. It's just bitterness and resentfulness and hatred. You're gonna implement that into your church. That's what you're gonna do. You're gonna integrate or do integration. No, you're not doing integration. You're just not. You're actually just destroying the gospel. That's what you're doing. And it's terrible. And so shame on you if you're a pastor doing that. I'm going to shut up because I could probably do this for like 2 hours. I think that I'm going to shut up after this. I think that this article, this discovery in the NSA is not just about the NSA. I think it's about a deep moral and theological problem at the core of America. And I'm just going to continue to say the same things. We need to speak up. We need to speak out. We need to tell people. We need to tell our pastors to repent. We need to tell elders to repent. We need to say stuff. People are ruthless in the Christian realm, right? Evangelical theological realm right now. Like they don't want to associate with people who are telling the truth. And you just have to be willing to take the loss. You have to be willing to take a punch. And you have to be willing to have people belittle you and berate you and call you things behind your backs. I tell you, who cares, dude? Like, who cares? If people are going to die, if babies are going to be murdered, if a trans person is going to shoot themselves in the head, then your moral responsibility as a Christian is to open your freaking mouth and say something, because people are going to die because of your cowardice. That's a fact, because words have supernatural power to change people's lives. It was a proclamation of the gospel that turned me into a Christian, and it's the proclamation of the gospel and the proclamation of the truth of Jesus Christ and the doctrines of the scriptures that will change people's life, that can change the course of history. That's what it's always been. At every step of the way, it's always been that. And the United States, the church in America, is failing at a rate that I've never heard of before. And speaking up and saying something about it is necessary. I don't care if it's about the Gospel Coalition or if you have a church of 25 people and your pastor's selling out and talking about, let's not talk politics. No, go talk to your pastor. Like, call him out. Like, no, dude, this is wrong. Let's talk politics because some baby's going to be beheaded tomorrow here in Madison, Wisconsin. That's what's going to happen. Little 6-month-old baby is going to be decapitated. We've got 1,000 churches in here in Madison. Not a single one of these cowards will speak out. I mean, you have to like pull teeth to get pastors to talk about. There's whatever the pro-life Sunday or whatever it is. I don't know if that's what it's called. You have to like pull teeth to get these people to talk about like pro-life, like that we love life, we love babies, we shouldn't murder babies. You have to like tell these pastors. Churches don't want to do it. We don't want to talk about that. Wait, that's too divisive. No, we don't want to be divisive. We don't want to divide everybody. Oh, you want to? Okay, well, you will be unified in hell. All right? I'll be quiet. Thought I had to talk about that, get that off my chest. But yeah, we've got some interesting podcasts coming up here. Some more political ones, some more theological ones, some stuff on C.S. Lewis, The Pilgrim's Regress, the Paul and the New Perspective, N.T. Wright. I think I have a couple that I want to name the names, but we're just going to wait. You just never know. People can get weird. So we're just going to not name names until it's done. But anyways, that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next one.